What's up, everyone? My name is Kyle Hart. I am a registered marriage and family therapist, and I am going to start creating YouTube videos now. So feel free to tune in, and I'll still be sharing things on TikTok, but it'll be more so like taking pieces of the YouTube videos and sharing it with y'all, and then creating like other TikToks that are separate for their own sake. Topics of today: I read a book. I don't remember the exact title, so I will come back and put it in. But it's Dr. Gibson, I believe, and she wrote this book on emotionally immature parents and how that affects adult children that are trying to kind of unlearn and heal from some of the coping mechanisms, attachment styles that they acquired through their upbringing. First, we're going to go into the idea of emotionally mature and immature parents. So, in short, the idea that emotionally mature parents are able to emotionally connect and their kids feel very secure. They feel seen, they feel heard, they feel like they have somebody that they can go to for anything, and they enjoy that person. Like that person also makes them feel like they're wanted around, like they're appreciated, and that affects a child's emotional safety, which can then influence their creativity, their ability to focus, their ability to learn, their ability to love, and even like choose patterns of people that they want to be friends with or romantic partner. Then there are emotionally immature parents that really are people who haven't had like safe or supportive environments emotionally growing up, and it can be extremely difficult, uncomfortable to lean into emotional connections because they may not even have an emotional connection with themselves. This isn't necessarily by choice. They had to cope with their environments growing up. The further we go back in time, if you go to like the 60s and the 1900s or the 1800s, it's like there's the idea that obedience is the proper way that you raise a child, especially in Western society, but this also exists in other like places as well. And if we're looking at it from an African perspective, if you imagine where a lot of Africans were in the 1800s as far as like transatlantic slave trade goes, the things that black parents had to do in order to try to protect their children, and then some of them aren't healthy, some of them are harmful, and then some of them are empowering, and they're things that make us unique as a people and as a community of different cultures and diversity. Like that time affects the environment that the parent grows into, and their ideas of what being a parent means or what kids are and are not allowed to do. So that's one factor. A second factor that influences emotional immaturity is a child's upbringing. Did they feel safe? Did they feel comfortable? Did they have people to turn to? Were their parents available? And third, are these people immigrants? Because there's a lot of cultural switches and sometimes cultural beliefs, some that are healthy and empower a child and make them feel loved. And then there are also beliefs that disempower a kid and make them disconnect from themselves or find different ways to cope with their environment in order to get by. And then fourth is like class, which can influence your resources, your time that you have to share with your children. Some parents don't intentionally harm their kids, but they're not able to be there for their kids. So there's time, there's culture, there's class, as far as like financial access to resources and even time to be available to their children, and many more things that influence a parent's level of emotional development. That's what I personally call it, instead of like referring to it as emotionally immature or maturity, because it polarizes two people. Now I want to go a little bit into the different types of parents. There's some work done by the likes of like John Bowlby on attachment styles and other doctors, and they find that there are different types of parenting approaches, and this starts from the ages of 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, and babies start to take in how they react to certain relationships or their caregivers, and as well as their environment from a very young age. I believe it was John Bowlby's research that she quoted, just in terms of different parenting styles, where there are parents that are like that reject their kid and they don't respond to their kid's needs emotionally. Maybe they're like extremely depressed, or they're preoccupied with other things and they just don't prioritize it, or they're not able to. and sometimes they don't soothe the kid afterwards. So these levels of like disconnection can create a level of emotional isolation. And real quick, if you haven't heard of adverse childhood experiences, it's ACEs. You can Google ACE score and you'll find like the proper website so that you can have an idea of what your ACE score is. It's important to know your ACE score, to be honest. ACE score is correlated with mental health issues that people develop as well as physical health issues. So it's not just something mental that you can just say, I'm going to overpower this. We're talking about like chronic illnesses that develop from responses that we learn as a kid. So it's important to learn how to approach this via self-compassion, healthy communities, therapy. The approach is a little bit different for everyone, but there are some common themes in the journey of learning to heal oneself. I believe I went over different types of parents. So there are parents that reject their kids' needs, and this teaches kids that they can't rely on their parents. There are parents that are very like attentive, but then there are moments where they're not, giving mixed signals to the kid. This can influence things like attachment styles. This influences a kid's attachment styles. There are parents that are passive, where they don't really give. As this kid grows up, maybe they're not. They don't really step in on things in the kid's life that a mostly mature parent would step in on. And then are there are parents that take their anger out on their children physically, emotionally. They abuse their kid intentionally or unintentionally, and children respond to this as well. And I don't think I touched on neglect, but neglect is a form of abuse. It doesn't always have to be conscious. Now, the primary theme here that she talks about in this book is how preoccupied parents are focused on their own world, and they're not able to attend to their child's emotional needs. And this creates feelings of emotional isolation. And as this kid grows up, they oftentimes feel emotionally isolated in their environments, and these kids take different life paths. These kids can be very self-competent because they've learned to meet their own needs, but that doesn't emotionally leave them fulfilled. So people can be in what seems like a healthy relationship and feel very empty. People can have jobs that they don't really like because they never really got to know themselves enough to go into pursue things that they wanted. Maybe they performed for their parents' sake or for their needs so that they can get out of their environment. And in the process of getting out of their environment, as humans, we tend to attract towards what feels familiar. So in the process of moving out, let's say at the age of like 17, 19, 22, you might choose a romantic partner that reminds you of your environment because that's what feels comfortable to you. That's what you know how to function in, but that's not always healthy. When someone's coming from an environment where they had strong connections with people that were emotionally immature. There's a lot of reasons why we should reflect on our childhood and attachment styles, and this probably won't become prominent to you until you start to realize issues in relationships with people you care about, or internal emotional states and mental health experiences that make you want to figure out how to change things for the better. Now, the process of healing from adverse childhood experiences, it takes time. Like, really think about it. This is something that's probably taking place from, maybe you're a teen. So it's been taking place for 15 years. Maybe you're an adult in your 30s. This is something you've been living with for 30 years. It may not reverse in the span of a few weeks or a few months. And it's extremely hard to do by yourself. I wouldn't recommend that for anybody. We are social creatures, and we can read a lot of books, we can journal, we can do self-work, we can learn how to become really good at like a career or a sport such as like fighting or work. But that's different from actually like learning how to feel emotionally secure and be in emotionally secure relationships. With that being said, please be self-compassionate, or practice self-compassion and patience with yourself. And that's something that I constantly have to remind myself as I learn and grow and heal. Majority of the book talks a lot about like the issues that come from it. I do wish that it touched more and went into more detail on how to reparent ourselves. Essentially, there's three main tips that she like highlighted that are helpful for people learning how to engage with parents that are emotionally less developed than they are, and be able to maintain relationships for those of you that want to do that. And for those of you that want to learn how to really assess people around you to figure out who you can have an emotional, secure connection with versus who you have to set boundaries with so that you don't get emotionally aroused when you're interacting with them, because that emotional arousal over time can literally kill you. So I wish I could say that in a softer way, but it is what it is. 3 tips from Dr. Gibson on how to cope with parents that are not at the same level of emotional maturity than you. And I don't think these 3 tips are going to fix everything. I think that you should definitely see a therapist, to be honest, if this message relates to you, because these situations are so complex and situational to the individual that if we neglect that, the tips alone are not going to change our lives. We're going to go into the 3 suggestions from Dr. Gibson with a little twist on it that you can do if you are someone who's more emotionally mature than your parent or significant other or whoever it is that you're interacting with and you're working on your relationship with them. So, number 1 is more of a journal prompt and exercise. You've got to go over the ideal world that you want to have with that person and the roles that you play in order to receive that emotional connection that you desire with them, right? And then you kind of have to acknowledge that there's nothing that you can personally do to change how they're showing up in the relationship. That's not something that you can control. Usually, the only ways people and their habits will change is if they decide to do that on their own, or B, have like a life tragedy that changes their perspective on things. 3, like go to like therapy and work on it or something like that. So once you get that journal prompt done and you acknowledge that that's outside of your power, then you're gonna go write another journal prompt on what in life would make you feel emotionally secure without like looking to them for that emotional connection. So you write about your authentic self, your life, like the traits of yourself that you want to acquire or that you enjoy, the type of lifestyle, the type of community that you want to have around you. And you're going to keep those 2 in mind whenever you're interacting with your parents or whoever you're applying this to, right? Now, step number 2 is you're going to focus on the outcomes of the interactions that you have with them. So like as opposed to looking for them to validate you or have certain experiences with them, you're going to focus on the goals of each interaction, which she gets from a lot of her clients that this sounds very cold and they don't want to have a relationship like this for the rest of their lives. So I think you can kind of like look at the strengths and weaknesses of where you feel comfortable talking about certain topics or like ways of interacting with this person. But she says that ultimately, for a lot of the people that she works with, their parents will do things that make them feel emotionally secure. And then once they revert back to that role where they feel comfortable, then the parent goes back to who they were. And it turns into this cycle that just doesn't break. So again, unless that person has done the inner work or has had an experience that's made them change their perspective, even when they start to change their behaviors, you should stick to your boundaries or else you might end up getting let down again. And then focusing on the outcome, you're going to take a step back and be objective, not as emotionally standing in the relationship. And of course, this is a practice. This is why I would suggest going to therapy, because this is something that can be extremely difficult to do on your own, but learning to interact from a more objective standpoint that can help lower the level of like turmoil that takes place in the relationship, where there might be disconnections or fights to where you guys don't interact with each other or interact with each other in unhealthy ways. Like it can basically prevent the relationship from getting worse. 3rd, learn to assess someone's level of emotional awareness or maturity. That way you know how to interact with them so that you can understand how to like show up in different relationships, whether this is friendships, business, or whatever community that you are deciding to build around you. When you're dealing with someone that you have a higher level of emotional awareness, then you're going to be more aware of like the duration of the time that you spend with them or the topics that you decide to speak about with them. And 3rd, even like what you look for as far as like emotional feedback or validation on ideas that you have. You're not going to get that from them. that can also influence a reflection on your social circle so that you can start to build community with people that are also emotionally aware so that you guys can both experience a sense of emotional security within yourselves. And over time, when you do that in different areas of your life, it can really change the quality of your life and it can change the quality of your health in the long run. I hope that this gives you some things to reflect on, and I wish you well with your journey for those of you that are doing that inner work, because it's definitely something that's hard. So give yourself patience, give yourself grace, and I wish you well, and I'll see you guys later. All right, balance.